Welcome, everyone, to our UC Master Food Preserver online program. Today, we're going to be working on core skills with sweet apple cider butter and dehydrated apple rings. But first, let's get you some idea of who's actually talking today. My name is Penny Pearson. I'm the MC for the program today. Our question and answer monitor is Robin Barker. She will monitoring the Q&A box to make sure that all your questions are answered over the course of the session today. Please keep in mind that our session is being recorded, so we'll give you a link to a copy of the slide deck as well as the class handouts after the presentation and after you complete a special online survey for us. Our presenters today are Ellen Goodwin and Jill MacArthur. So a little housekeeping before we start. First and foremost, we really want to hear your questions, but in the meantime, if you could keep yourself muted, we'd appreciate that. But if you, when we get to that point of asking, opening up for questions, please raise your hand using the Zoom toolbar there that you see at the bottom of your screen. We also have some other ways that you can get our attention as well, which is the Q&A box. That's also in that lower toolbar where you can find the Q&A. Now, if for some reason you don't see that Q&A, you might see this little circle with 3 dots in it. You can click on that and then from there select the Q&A box, and that will pop up on top of your screen. So you can then type in your questions or comments into that Q&A box. And when we get to our Q&A session, Robin will make sure that your questions and comments are duly noted and answered. So from here, we're going to look at, when we open that up, we want you to use your microphone. If you raise your hand, that allows myself and Robin to recognize you and make sure that your questions are answered if you don't put them in the Q&A box. We love hearing your voices, and we want to encourage you to go ahead and speak up. So a little bit about who we are. So the Master Food Preserver online delivery program, we're really all about working with our community. We're all volunteer-based, we're grant-funded, and we are really there to work with the University of California Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources to provide really scientifically up-to-date research-based information on food safety and preservation. So our mission is all about that. We want to make sure that Californians can, use their food safely, it be culturally appropriate for what and who they are. We want them to use research-based practices and safely preserve their food. This helps to reduce food waste. We increase food security, and then we help to provide some engaging ways to explore healthy food. And we like to give you some new ideas about how you can use what you have or what you purchase from the grocery store or from your local farmer's market. Throughout our presentation today, you may hear the presenters or even myself talk about particular brands or something like that. Please be aware that they're our views. They're in no way any type of, endorsement or opposition to something. It's just our personal opinions. UC Davis and the University of California is that's their stuff. We can talk about our stuff. So we want to just make sure that that when we talk about this, we're speaking from our experiences, and it's not something that's endorsed specifically by UC Davis. But we're always going to be giving you information that's research-based and safe. So speaking of safety, one of the things that all of our presenters will be talking about is getting started and how you need to prepare your work area when you're going to be canning at home. And this just means getting things clean. Make sure your work surfaces are clean, and even think about those touch areas like, the handle of the refrigerator, the microwave oven door, or, even your phone. I don't know about you, but when I think about all the things that I handle with my hands and then I handle my phone, you want to make sure that you wipe that off. You can use, maybe a little sanitizing wipe. You can even use something even lightly watered with a little bit of vinegar just to make sure that we're not passing on any of those germs. You want to make sure that you keep your hair tied back. wear an apron. This is basically really basic stuff. And people think, well, the apron is to protect my clothes, but actually it's to protect your food from your clothes. So that's why an apron can be very handy. You're going to gather up all your utensils that you need. Our presenters will tell you what utensils you need, what equipment you need. Make sure that they're clean as well. Gather up all of your ingredients. I personally like to do all of my prep work in terms of having my ingredients out and then put out whatever spices and measure them so everything's ready to go when I'm ready to actually combine things together. But you do you. I mean, it's just something that I like to do so I know I have everything. I don't have to make a last minute dash to the store. You also need to make sure that you wash your produce. Anything that you're going to be canning, you just need to, warm soapy water, rinse it off. You don't have to use any special, you know, veggie wash stuff. Just make sure that they're clean. Each of our presenters today will probably speak a little bit more about this because their particular recipes may have other recommendations or things to be considered in terms of cleanliness or preparing the produce. So with that, we have 2 sessions today. The first one is sweet apple butter with Ellen Goodwin. I'm going to have her come on and she can tell you how to make this wonderful butter for this fall. Ellen.
Okay, thank you, Penny. So apple butter is one of those recipes that is forever popular. If you're unfamiliar with it, it doesn't actually contain butter. It's a sweet, spicy spread. It's great on toast or waffles. You can even use it to glaze things like pork chops or other meat. There are lots of tasty ways to use apple butter. And it's also a good choice if you like to give homemade gifts. Okay, next slide. Next slide. Oh, thank you. Okay. So the first step is to pick a recipe. And if you go online, you can find, I mean, literally hundreds of apple butter recipes. But we always recommend that you use a safe and tested recipe from a reliable source. And we recommend this because unlike in our home kitchens, labs that are created to verify food safety have sophisticated equipment that can do things like test the temperature inside a jar during canning. So they can ensure that a particular recipe achieves the temperature that's needed to destroy harmful microorganisms, such as Clostridium botulinum, which is the organism that causes botulism, which, as you may know, is a very serious illness that occasionally can lead to death. So to avoid that, we use safe, tested recipes. And the recipe I'm going to share today comes from the Ball Complete Book of Home Canning. But other good sources include the Complete Guide to Home Canning from the United States Department of Agriculture and a book called So Easy to Preserve, produced by the University of Georgia Cooperative Extension. So all of these books can be purchased online, and a great free source of recipes is the UC Master Food Preserver website program website. If you go there and click on resources, you will find a wealth of recipes and advice. Next slide. So the recipe that I'm going to talk about today, the apple butter, is called a hot pack recipe. And that just means we're going to put hot food into hot jars. And the jars are going to be processed in a water bath canner. And actually, the picture on the left is my water bath canner. But another really good choice that a lot of canners like is an atmospheric steam canner. So you can see that on the right. And a steam canner consists of 3 separate pieces. There is a small shallow pan that you just put about 2 quarts of water into. There's a perforated rack to set the jars on, and then there's a large dome cover. And you can use a steam canner interchangeably with a water bath canner for any recipe that involves a high acid food, and that is apples and most other fruits are high acid foods, and the processing time has to be less than 45 minutes. Lots of home canners really love using steam canners. They use a lot less water, so they're much, much quicker to heat up. Okay, so I did use the large pot, as you can see, and you don't actually have to buy a pot that's called a water bath canner. You can use any large pot so long as it has a rack of some kind for the jars to sit on. It has to have a securely fitting lid, and it has to be tall enough to have 1 or 2 inches of water boiling over the top of the jars when they are sitting on the rack. And there is another type of canner that you may have used or or heard about, and that is a pressure canner. And it is used primarily to can low acid foods. And that includes vegetables, meat, beans, soup, things like that. We're not going to be talking about that today, but if you're interested, there's a lot of information on the UC Master Food Preserver Program website. Next slide. So apple butter usually has a pretty short list of ingredients, and apples, of course, are the main thing. You can use any type of apple you like for this recipe. I live in the Sierra Nevada foothills, and this is an apple growing region. So I went to a farm stand and I got pink ladies and something called a Modi apple, Modi, which I'd never heard of, but is a sweet apple. You know, if you prefer a more sour taste, like a Granny Smith, you absolutely can use it for this recipe. And while we always say that you really need to pretty precisely follow a tested recipe, one area where some flexibility is fine is in dried spices. So this recipe called for cinnamon and cloves, and I did use those, and I thought they were, the result was very tasty. But let's say you don't like cloves, you could replace it with allspice or nutmeg or maybe just more cinnamon. I did also use granulated sugar, but the recipe says that if you would like a product that is less sweet, you can replace the sugar in this recipe with 1 cup of honey. So that's just another option. Okay, next slide. So I'll give you a little tour. Like Penny, I like to get everything set up before I start dealing with actually preparing the food. So what you can see here over on the left, the red object is a funnel, and it's very handy to have a funnel to get the food into your jars. But this particular funnel also measures headspace, so that's very convenient, and I ordered that online. There's also a plastic debubbler, which is another tool that also can measure headspace. There is a wand with a magnet. A lot of people like to use those to lift up lids while they're filling their jars. I've got a plastic chopstick, which I used to get air bubbles out of jars. I've got a thermometer, a jar lifter, and a food mill in this picture. So when I prepare everything prior to preparing the food, you're going to want to wash your jars and your rings in hot soapy water and rinse them. You can also wash your jars in the dishwasher. That's fine. Some recipes require that you sterilize your jars. If those are recipes that have processing times of under 10 minutes. This recipe actually has a processing time of 10 minutes. So I did not pre-sterilize the jars. But if you do have to sterilize them, all you need to do is put them into boiling water for 10 minutes. If you live more than 1,000 feet above sea level, you need to add an additional minute for every 1,000 feet. So I live at 2,600 feet, so I would boil them for 12 minutes if I was going to sterilize the jars. And then regarding the lids, lids can only be used one time. Jars and the rings can be used for generations, so long as the jars do not have any nicks or cracks in them. If they do, you should not use them for canning because they can break in the canner under the heat. And the rings can be used again and again unless they happen to be rusted or bent, and then you should replace them. But the lids are one time only, and just follow the directions on the package. And the lids that I used just said to wash them in hot soapy water, rinse them, and then set them aside until they were needed. So that's what I did. Next slide. Okay, so then we're going to prepare the apples. So you quarter, core, and peel them. And you can see actually here that I didn't peel them, and that's because I decided to use a food mill. And that, once the apples are cooked, separates the peels from the apple. And if you're the recipe says you can also use a food processor. So if you want to use the food processor, you're going to need to peel them first. Either way works fine. So then you can see that I cooked them in the apple cider. And again, if you fill out our brief survey, you'll get this recipe with all the exact amounts and the steps. Um, so you cook them. I put the lid on, covered them, and gently cooked them for, I don't know how long, but until they were very, very soft. Okay, so all right, next slide, please. And then this is the food mill. So once my apples were very soft and cooked, I put them through the food mill and I did separate out the peels. Again, I could have used a food processor. Then you add the sugar and the spices and cook it down. I cooked it for at least an hour. I think it was more than an hour till it's really nice and thick. And when I cooked it, I had the lid partially on because you want the steam to release so that the apple butter can cook down and get nice and thick. And usually it turns a little bit darker brown as you go along. Okay, next slide, please. So how do you know when your apple butter is ready to can? Well, it should look like it looks on this spoon in this picture. It should hold its shape on the spoon. Some people like to use a chilled plate and they put, again, like a little spoonful of apple butter on it. And so long as it holds its shape and there's no liquid around the edges, it's ready to be canned and you can move ahead. Okay, next slide. Okay, then it's time to fill the jars once your butter is cooked down and nice and thick. So you take a hot jar out of the canner, and I didn't mention this, but when we do hot pack, we try to bring the water temperature to about 180 degrees. And that's just because if you're going to put hot food, if you were to put it into a cold jar, the jar could break. So you have your jars sitting in hot water, and I pull them out one at a time, and I fill them up, and I measure the headspace, whatever method you're using. Um, and then you need to remove air bubbles. You can see here I'm using the plastic chopstick, and you just kind of move it around, make sure there are no air bubbles in there, and then carefully wipe the rims with a wet paper towel. You don't want any food residue on the rim. It can prevent it from sealing. And then you secure the lid and you put the lid straight down on and then tighten the ring to what we call fingertip tight. And that just means turn it until you begin to feel resistance and then turn it a little further. You don't want it to be, as tight as you can possibly make it because we want some air to escape during the canning process. Next slide. Okay. Then you're going to want to use a jar lifter to place the hot jars into your hot canner. And you have to make sure there's at least 1 inch of water over the tops of the jars. If there isn't enough, just add some more. You replace the lid on the canner, bring the water to a vigorous boil, and then adjust the heat to maintain a gentle boil and begin timing. In this case, it's 10 minutes. Um, if for any reason your water stops boiling while you're in the middle of your processing, you need to bring it back to a full boil and start timing over again from the beginning. And the other thing to know is that if you live more than 1,000 feet above sea level, you're going to need to process for a little bit longer. And that's because water boils at a lower temperature at a higher altitude. And if you take our little survey at the end of this presentation, and you'll get the link to the recipe, there's a chart on the recipe handout that shows you how long you need to cook depending on where you live. Okay, next slide. Okay, so you're after the 10 minutes or whatever the time is over, carefully lift the lid, turn off the burner, and you wait 5 minutes. And the reason is because this helps the food to settle and it's also part of the sealing process. So wait your 5 minutes and then carefully lift the jars out, lift them straight up and over, put them onto a towel and allow them to cool undisturbed for 12 to 24 hours. It's tempting to maybe dry them off or try to tighten up the rings. Don't you just leave them and they'll be fine. Okay, next slide. Okay, and then after 12 to 24 hours, you want to check to see, make sure your jars are sealed. So there, you take off the rings to check, and then press the top of the jar, as you can see that I'm doing here. It shouldn't move at all. If it goes up and down, it's not sealed. And another way to test it is simply to pick it up. This is without the ring. Pick it up by the edges of the lid and it should be completely stable. There shouldn't be any problem with it staying on. And so once you've done that, you can wash and dry, label, and store the jars in a cool, dark location. We recommend for best quality that you eat the apple butter within a year, but they will be shelf stable. You can keep them in your cabinet or in your pantry. Now, if you happen to have a jar that doesn't seal, and it happens to everybody sometimes. First of all, take the ring off, and you have the option. You have a couple of options. You can put it in the refrigerator and eat it within a few weeks. You can put it into a freezer safe container. Make sure you leave enough headspace, and you can store it in the freezer. It'll be fine. Or you could reprocess that jar so long as you pulled it out of the canner less than 24 hours ago. So if it's been less than 24 hours and you want to reprocess, take off the ring, take off the lid, check the jar for any cracks or nicks. That can sometimes cause a jar not to seal. Assuming the jar is fine, put on a brand new lid because the lids, again, are only one-time use. So you have to have a whole new lid, put the ring back on, put it back into the canner, bring it up to a boil, and just process it again for the 10 minutes. If you have a jar with a nick, you'll need to put it into a clean jar, then go through that process. Next slide. So once you have all this tasty apple butter, what do you do with it? Well, you can give it away to people. They usually are happy to get it, but it's really good on toast or biscuits or muffins. You can top waffles, pancakes, oatmeal, yogurt. You can use it as part of your cinnamon roll filling. I sometimes substitute applesauce for part of the oil in something like muffins or the butter. And you can certainly use apple butter for that as well. You could glaze pork chops or other meat. This is a sweet glaze, which some people like. I think I might, if I were going to use it as a glaze, I might add like a little Dijon mustard or a little vinegar, something like that to make a glaze. A really good little snack is to have a toasted crostini with apple butter and warm brie on top. Another idea is to top a chicken sandwich or a veggie burger with caramelized onions and apple butter. Really yummy. So anyway, that concludes my apple butter presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ellen. Robin, do we have any questions for Ellen?
We have just popped up one question, and it says, my apple butter, I'm assuming, was too watery. How can I fix it? It's not in a can.
Um, I would say the best thing is while you're canning in the process, it's just a matter of cooking it down. If you just cook it longer with the lid, you got to have the lid off so steam can get out, or at least the lid partially off. And that will thicken up your apple butter. Yeah.
So we have another question that says, can I make this a no sugar or low sugar recipe? Can I just substitute some sugar in and out, or
The answer would be no. We really recommend that you follow the recipe, and sugar is a critical part of this recipe. It's actually a preservative, and it also affects the density or the consistency, and that when it's tested, that makes a difference in terms of the temperature inside the jar. However, there are apple butter recipes out there that are safe and tested and from sources like Ball that use artificial sweeteners. And so you can find a recipe that uses some sort of like Splenda, something like that. But another option would be just to keep it in the refrigerator or the freezer. And then the sugar is absolutely not an issue. You can just cook the apple butter to your taste, whatever, when make sure, taste it as you're going along. When it seems thick enough and taste that you like the flavor, just put it in the refrigerator, eat it within a few weeks, or put it in the freezer.
okay, we have another question, and she says, or he says, my apple butter has a gritty texture. What did I do wrong?
Well, to tell you the truth, I don't know what you did wrong, but I would think that like I did actually, I think I didn't mention this, but after I put my apple butter through the food mill, it was still a little chunky. And so I used an immersion blender to blend it up. Probably also a food processor would make it smoother. So it's possible just whatever process you used didn't chop it up. Now, if it's actually gritty, I'd kind of wonder if a few seeds got in there somehow, some apple seeds. But those would be my recommendations. Maybe use an immersion blender or a food processor.
I'm looking around. I do have a follow-up with the no sugar or low sugar recipe. One thing that we found about preservatives or other foods that are made low sugar is that low sugar, because it doesn't have the sugar to bind with the water, there's more water available for bacteria to grow. And so frequently the low and no sugar varieties will spoil or start growing mold faster than the ones with more sugar. So it's worthwhile keeping a special eye on those. And once you do see any sort of mold or anything, you need to throw it all away because the visible mold just reflects problems that may be going on in the subsurface. So I don't see any more questions yet.
Okay.
We ready to move on, Robin?
Yes, I think so.
Awesome. Okay, let's go ahead and take a peek here at our next presenter talking about dehydrated apple rings. And Jill is going to give us that overview. And if you're ready, Jill, go right ahead.
Okay, thank you, Penny. So today we're going to be making dehydrated apple rings. These are great around the holidays for gifts and holiday plates. But first I'm going to give you an overview of the different drying processes. Next slide, please. Drying is the oldest form of preserving food that we know of, and it works because dehydration removes water from the food, and pathogens and bacteria, molds, they all need water to grow. So without the water, this prevents that from happening and prevents spoilage of the food. Next slide, please. There are several ways to dry your food. There's solar dehydration using the sun or a solar dehydrator. Now, the sun is when the food is left out in the sun. Today, we usually use a screen, maybe on top of a couple of cinder blocks with a screen on top to keep out insects and other curious wildlife. And the food is left out until it's fully dry. The solar dehydrators are considered sort of a step up, and they're similar to a solar oven, but the sides are open except for a screen, which allows airflow but keeps out insects. And then usually the top of the dehydrator has a piece of plastic. And what that does is it increases the temperature inside the dehydrator 20 to 30 degrees. And if you're drying outdoors, you need to remember that the ambient temperature needs to be 85 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. So that's why this piece of plastic is very important to increase that, because the optimum temperature for drying food, whether you're indoors or out, is 140 degrees. And then there's vine drying, where we leave the produce on the vine until it's fully dry. And this is usually like if you think of beans on the vine, you let it go until the pod is completely brown and the beans rattle inside, and then you harvest them. I have used this for some tomatoes kind of mistakenly, and it came out okay. Air drying is another way, where the air is left in the food is left in the open air until it dehydrates. Screened-in porch is great for this process. It allows you to keep out curious pets and insects. And what you need to remember about these processes is that at night, the cool air condenses and the moisture may go back into the produce. And that's what makes these processes take a bit longer. Now, these three methods require that you pasteurize the produce before you eat it. So there are two methods to do this. One is the freezer method, where you take your dried food, put it in a freezer bag, and put it in your freezer, which is set at 0 degrees. And it has to maintain this 0-degree temperature. And you leave it in the freezer for 48 hours. The second method is the oven method, where you preheat your oven to 160 degrees. Place your dried food on a tray or a shallow pan. Always do it in a single layer and not too crowded. And you leave it in the oven for 30 minutes. Next slide, please. Oven drying is another way to dry food. People have done this for years. If you have an oven, you have a food dehydrator. So the first thing you need to do is check and see if your oven goes as low as 140. And if not, your food will cook instead of dry. So it kind of defeats the purpose. Oven drying takes 2 times as long as an electric dehydrator because it doesn't have any forced airflow. So you can count on 12 to 24 hours for the process if you're using your oven. And the oven door must remain propped open. And this is for airflow. Some people take a fan and place it so that it blows across that opening to increase the airflow. And you also have to monitor this because with the oven door propped open, your temperature may fluctuate and you really do have to keep it at 140. For safety reasons, if you have young children at home, you may choose a different way of drying because, curious kids, it's really easy for them to walk up to that open door and put their hand inside and pull the door down and get injured by the heat. Next slide, please. Electric dehydrators are wonderful to have. They maintain a consistent temperature. You can see I have photographed here a couple different types of electric dehydrators. The one in the center has a horizontal airflow, and if you look at the photo on the right, that shows the heating element and the fan are on one side, in this case in the back, and so the air is forced across the trays. A vertical airflow is the photo on the left, and the heating element and the fan are at the bottom, and they force air up through the trays. So the difference is if you're dehydrating more than one type of food at a time, then you're going to try, you really want to have a horizontal airflow because it forces the air across the tray, not across several trays. The flavors are more likely to meld if the air is forced through several trays. So keep that in mind. If you're going to dry different things and you do have a vertical airflow dryer, that's just fine, but just be sure that you choose foods that go together well. Usually these trays have a timer, and that is extremely convenient because the dehydration time is quite long and it's really easy to forget that you have food going and then find out that you have leather. Next slide, please. Okay, so you're going to prepare everything ahead of time. As my previous presenters and MC have told you, this is a great way to go about any kind of preserving that you're doing. You're going to wash your hands, clean your work area, make sure your dehydrator trays are clean because it's easy. They don't look dirty after the previous time you dehydrated, but hot soapy water, wash and dry is always a good idea. Now, the first thing you really need to do, besides mixing up your spices, is choose your apples. And you're thinking, oh, what kind of apples and how many should I get? So what you need to remember about dehydration is that it concentrates the flavor. So sweet apples will get sweeter and tart apples will become more tart. I use Gala apples because they're sort of middle of the road in sweetness and I like the shape. The type of apple you choose may also influence your choice of spices. I mix up my spices, I put them into an empty salt shaker because that's the easiest way for me to apply them evenly. You may want to use a sieve, a strainer, whatever you have around the house. I find the salt shaker to be the handiest for me. For a sweeter apple, I use cinnamon, nutmeg, and cardamom. And if you're not familiar with cardamom, it has a floral flavor and a little bit goes a long way. Just keep that in mind. For a more savory apple, I use cinnamon, ginger, and clove. And again, clove, like cardamom, goes a long way. You could also use your favorite chili powder, or perhaps not even put any spice on them and use a drizzle of hot honey. All of those will work and be delicious. Of course, the hot honey would go on after the dehydration process when you're ready to serve. Next slide, please. Okay, after you've prepared your spices, you need to prepare a bowl of anti-browning solution. Now, this is going to stop your apples from browning, and if they start browning, they will continue to brown through the dehydration process, which is quite long. So I mix the prescribed amount of ascorbic acid, which is vitamin C, or you could use ball fruit fresh with the correct amount of water. You could also use bottled lemon juice, and we use bottled lemon juice instead of a lemon off the tree because it has a consistent pH level, which is really important for the acidification of the fruit and to stop the browning. I suggest you use a very large bowl because the apples are going to displace a fair amount of water. So you don't want to end up with apples and water overflowing on your counter. You have to cover the slices completely. That way you won't have just little brown spots here and there on your lovely apple rings. Next slide, please. So you have to wash, peel, and core your apples. And the slices should be 1/8 of an inch thick or less. I love to use this device that I use for pies. It's a peeler, slicer, corer. It's really fun. You can get kids involved. You get consistent shapes and consistent thickness. and it goes really fast. It leaves the entire apple intact, as you can see on the right. You get sort of a slinky. And so in order to get rings, you just cut straight down through one section and they will separate into rings. Be sure you put your apples into that anti-browning solution as you peel and slice them, because otherwise you're going to have a whole pile of rings just getting browner as you're waiting to prepare the other apples. Next slide, please. Another method you can use to slice is the kitchen mandolin. And these are fabulous. They make thinner slices. They leave this great festive star shape in the middle from where the seeds were. I found that even though the core is there, it doesn't really change the texture or the taste of the rings once they're dried. If you look at the photo on the left, you can see that the apple that I'm slicing is stuck into a disc. This disc protects my hands and my fingers from the blade of the mandolin. If you have misplaced your disc, you have an old mandolin you got from your mother, or whatever, your mandolin didn't come with a disc, some way to protect yourself, I highly recommend an anti-cut glove. These are available online, they're inexpensive, and they can save you future injury. Next slide, please. Okay, so our apples are sliced, they're peeled, they're sliced, they've been put in the solution, and now we're ready to put them onto the tray. Take them out, pat them dry, and then put them on your dehydrator tray. And I usually slide a piece of parchment beneath the tray so that it will catch the excess spices. Sprinkle the spice mixture over your apple rings, slide the tray in the dehydrator, and then repeat the process until you've used up all of your apples. And then you can set your temperature to 140 degrees, set your timer. As you can see, I set mine for 10 hours. You can check the slices for the level of dryness at 8 to 10 hours. Now, I found that 8 hours really just isn't enough, but it depends on your apples. If the slices are flexible, you need to let them dry longer. Next slide, please. Are they done yet? This is a question you're going to hear all day long because your entire house is going to smell like apple pie during this process. So the ways to check for doneness are, is it pliable? Can I bend it in half easily? Is it sticky when I bend it in half? Is it any tacky to my fingers at all? If I cut several of the rings, let's say 4 or 5, and I see that there's visible moisture, I can squeeze out some drops, then you need to put your rings back into the dehydrator for more time. Check again after 1 to 2 hours. And if the rings are still pliable, but they're not sticky, you don't see any visible moisture, you can take them out and let them cool completely for 1 hour. Next slide, please. Conditioning is your next step. This is a very important process that helps to prevent mold growth and the activity of enzymes by equalizing the remaining moisture in the rings. Rings can have a different level of moisture depending on where they were in the dehydrator, how the airflow hit them, several factors. So you let your rings cool completely, but never for more than an hour, because if you leave them out, then moisture from the air can seep back into your rings. And that sort of defeats the whole purpose. So you place your rings into an airtight container for 7 to 10 days. And I know this seems like a long time, but if you're sending these across the country as a gift, you wouldn't want one of your loved ones to open up a container of moldy apple rings. So a glass container will allow you to see if there's any condensation buildup. You shake the container daily to help move the remaining moisture out of the apple rings, and the drier rings will absorb moisture from the rings that have more. And then your rings are ready to go after 7 to 10 days. They'll keep in an airtight container for up to 1 year. Next slide, please. So these are great for all kinds of things. Gifting, again, as I said, if you're going to send them across the country, that conditioning step is super important. They're also great for teacher gifts because you can make a lot of them at once. They're inexpensive. You can package them into small, festive little packages. They're easy to hand out. The holiday plate is a great way to go. As you can see, they stack beautifully. They're really fun to arrange. They're great with a soft cheese, or as I mentioned before, maybe a drizzle of hot honey. Hiking, they're light, they don't take up much space, and they're actually quite durable. You can smush these around in your pack and they still taste great and they're easy to eat. They're also filling. They give you a lot of energy if you're doing something like biking. For your kids, in their lunches, for snacks, these are fantastic because they're fun to eat. And I can tell you from working in schools, the number one item in a school compost pile is a full apple with one bite out of it. So if even though you put that apple in and it didn't come back, that doesn't mean it was eaten. So I highly recommend packaging these into your kids' lunches because they actually will eat them. Now, the last thing I have to say about dehydration is that this is a great way to get your kids or grandkids involved in preserving their own food. So get some apples and enjoy the process. Next slide, please. Next slide. So there are several places that you can find tested recipes to make dehydrated food. I got these directions from So Easy to Preserve, as Ellen said, put out by the University of Georgia Cooperative Extension. You can go to the University of California Master Food Preserver website or the National Center for Home Food Preservation. There are several sites that you can find instructions for dehydration, and I hope you enjoy that.
Thank you, Jill. That was terrific. Now I'll turn it over to Robin, see if we have any questions, and she'll help guide us to get them answered.
People are very interested in the mandolin. So we have one question. So how thick do you cut using the mandolin?
My mandolin slices are very thin. I would say almost like a 16th of an inch. And what you have to remember when you're using the mandolin beyond the safety side is that you must peel the apples first, because even that thin ring of peel will hold in moisture. So mandolins come in many different configurations. You may have an adjustable blade. You may have blades that pull in and out if you want to do julienne or some other, crinkle cut or something. I prefer the mandolin with the fixed blade, and I have an old one from my mother that honestly, it looks like it's something out of Star Wars. It's terrifying, and I don't use it very often. But the plastic one that I had in the photograph was very inexpensive, and that is the mandolin I use the most.
We have one person who suggested a mandolin, and I took a look out of it. But what characteristics, safety characteristics, or utility characteristics are good to look for in a mandolin?
Ease of cleaning is one. There's usually a portion of the mandolin, a piece that will pop out in front of the blade. You have to be extremely careful cleaning the mandolin, washing it, and I would let it air dry. But you want to be sure that you can get all of the bits of fruit or whatever you're slicing out of the mandolin. You saw that they have sort of striations running vertically down the mandolin toward the blade. That's usually for the juices. So you want to be sure that it's easy to get those things out. I mean, if you wanted to go to big extremes, you could dedicate a toothbrush to your mandolin. But at the same time, I would say that's the most important. I do have a mandolin where the blades slide in and out, and I really don't like it. It's just not stable. So stability is a big portion of this. You have to use your free hand to stabilize the mandolin. So I suggest one that's fairly low. This can be a little frustrating because you can't cut a lot of slices at once, but nevertheless, you'll have a better experience with it.
Yeah, I've had a scary experience with a mandolin and enough scars to prove it.
Yep.
Thank you for answering those questions. Now, I also want to tell folks that Ellen continues to be here. So if you didn't get a chance to ask those questions about apple butter or canning, Ellen is also here with Jill. So that doesn't stop you from asking your dehydration questions. And that's the next dehydration question I have. What is the best way to store my dehydrated apples? Is glass better than plastic?
I would say if you have glass, I would definitely go with glass as long as it's airtight, because that allows you to see your apples. Um, Obviously, you're going to store them in a dark place. right? So that they are not affected by any kind of heat buildup through sun going through the glass. And that's what I would do. But as you saw in my photo, I had a plastic container. And that's just for me easier in shaking. And what you need to remember is that every time you open that jar or that container, air gets in and brings in with it whatever is in the air in your house. And that includes a bit of moisture. So I recommend that when you're storing them, if you're going to serve, take out the amount that you think you need and then reclose the container. If you get to the point where there's a lot of airspace in your container, you might want to move to a smaller container just to keep that to a minimum. But again, opening and closing a lot, unless you're going to eat these up in a few days, which is somewhat likely, I wouldn't recommend that.
We have another question. It's, I dried my apples, but they didn't taste sweet or pleasant. What might I've done wrong?
Hmm. Well, it could have been in your choice of apple. And because some apples are more tart than others, I have done this with Granny Smith apples all of once, and I won't do it again. But if you like that tart flavor, that's fantastic. I usually cook with Granny Smith and I find them fantastic in pies, but they just, for me, were not my taste in dehydration because the flavor is so concentrated. What you might do is just eat a few different types of apples. You know, there's thousands of varieties of apples, and when we shop from store to store, we may actually see 10 or 12 total across 3 or 4 stores. You usually see the same types in every store. But maybe you'd buy a few types, eat them, see what you like the best, and then try it again.
Now, I don't see a question regarding them, but I know we've discussed using desiccants in the past. So what do you think about using those food safe little envelopes with desiccants inside to
You
help
know,
in storage?
I think they're fine as long as they're food safe. We did talk about this. Don't take the ones that come from your shoes or any other industrial thing that comes into your home that happens to have one. Absolutely get the food safe desiccants. If the package opens, yeah, obviously everything has to go. But I think they work just fine. But again, you're going to want to store these in an airtight container um, out of the sunlight.
Any other questions, Robin?
No, I think we've reached the end of our questions and I don't see anybody's little hand up. And so I'm going to
Oh.
turn it back over to you, Penny.
All right, great. Well, we'll move along here. We do want to keep you informed of our upcoming programs. So on this slide, we do have a couple of QR codes. The top one is to let you bookmark future events from the web page. But just so you know, in a nutshell, we do have our Ask a Master Food Preserver session, which is great. Lots of people come and lots of folks can answer questions there on Sunday, November 16th, and that's from 4 to 5 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. We also will have another session on apples, which is from orchard to table. And in that one, we'll be doing apple pie filling and then also having some discussions and demonstrations on freezing apples. That one is Wednesday, November 19th from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. on Pacific Daylight Time. And then we have one coming in December. We know the holidays are right here. So we have a session on making and preserving holiday foods for gifts. And that's December 2nd from 7 to 8 p.m. So mark those. If you want to use the QR code, you can. It'll take you right to it on your phone or mobile device. Of course, you can also get to it by the next slide I'll show you, which allows you to sign up for our monthly newsletter. We try to do very informative news articles, not only about food safety, canning, crops, what's available, etc., but also we like to showcase what our master food preservers are doing as well. So you can see what we're up to in the kitchen. We have a Facebook page as well. We love to promote all of those same sessions that I just spoke about through our Facebook site as well as Instagram. And again, we have those QR codes there as well as the URL link that will take you to them to sign up to keep yourself informed about what's going on within the Master Food Preserver program. And just so you know, we are in the process of taking applications to become a master food preserver. Now, we do have some requirements here. We have a recorded information session that you can watch. We do ask that you attend the live online Q&A session after you've watched that recorded information. We have applications that are due by November 23rd. So our last live session is on the 20th, and then the application is due on the 23rd. Now the training, now this is for both the online delivery program, what you're participating in today, as well as the county-based programs. So depending on where you're from, there may be different choices for which program you want to join, whether it's the online delivery program or your master food preserver program sponsored by your local county. So you can get more information also through that QR code. It's a wonderful opportunity. There is a time commitment. You will study and you'll get to do fun things when you're done. So take a moment if you're interested, scan that QR code and you can find out more about the program itself. Now I'm getting ready to end the session, but I want to remind you that we do need your input and feedback. I don't know how many of you have worked in grant-funded programs and volunteer-run programs, but our funding really depends on your input. We want to see how we're doing. We want to hear your suggestions, and we want to learn from you about what you may be interested in learning more about. So when you leave this Zoom meeting, when we close the meeting, a pop-up or a screen will open on the browser that you entered this meeting on. So if you're using Chrome, it'll show up in Chrome. If you're on Edge, it'll show up in Edge. You need to fill out that survey, all right? And once you've done that, we'll send you a link and that you can use to open up and see the slide deck as well as the recipe handout. So you have a copy of the information that you've seen today. So I really appreciate all of you being here today. Thank you to my presenters, Ellen and Jill and Robin. Thank you for managing the questions for us today. I wish everyone a wonderful weekend, and as we always say, happy preserving. Thank you very much.